Hello and welcome back, and here we are reporting in the middle of RAMageddon, people. That is right, if you want memory or even SSDs and hard drives right now, you are faced with two major problems. One, the pricing is billy bonkers, and the availability is non-existent, with some brands talking about they're not even going to be able to produce consumer-grade hardware in the market for the next year or so. So, this video is two things. The second half of this video is me going through lots of deals that I found online for hard drives, SSDs, as well as NAS devices where the memory could be utilized or shucked out. So if all you care about is that, skip ahead to the chapters at the bottom to the second half of the video. But the first half of this video is going to be talking about how we have reached a point where we are shucking hardware. We're not just shucking external drives anymore. We are shucking real life equipment because the RAM inside these things is worth more than the thing they are in. It is insane. And we're going to be going through a few examples in the second half of the video. But I should also add, this isn't the only way to find cheaper storage media and RAM online. 2 weeks ago, we made a video talking about numerous methods that I've utilized over the last 8 to 10 years to get hold of cheaper hard drives, cheaper SSDs, and cheaper RAM. There's loads of tips and tricks in that. I recommend you check that video out. We're not going to go over it again here, but again, check it out. It's linked below. There's loads of stuff in that. But let's talk about the insanity that is shucking whole client systems now just for SSDs and RAM. Because this isn't new. IT bods and jobs in the background have been doing this for years. But it's weird now we've reached a place where shortages have forced the hand of consumers to do this in a way that they've only really done it up to this point on external hard drives and external SSDs. Now, there's three main areas, I would argue, that shucking of consumer hardware is at its peak right now. Number one is mini PCs. Mini PCs for the last 5-6 years are everywhere, thanks to SoC components and particularly CPUs designed around mobile technology from AMD and Intel arriving on the scene. There is just a glut of these devices in the market from the last few years. And if you go for mini PCs after about 2022, they're pretty much all DDR4. And when you get to about 2024, 2025, they're all pretty much DDR5. And the result is a lot of these devices have not become subject to the latest increases in component costs at production from 2025 and to 2026 for SSDs and memory. So whether it is you're looking at these being second-hand or you're looking at them in terms of buying them brand new on eBay, again, bods and jobs, you find out that these are so cheap to buy right now, and you can just take the RAM out, take the SSD out, and then, probably don't do this environmentally, sling it in the bin. But this is by no means a perfect system, because over the last couple of years, we have also seen mini PC manufacturers trying to find ways to make large economies in their production by going for LPDDR attached memory. That is when the RAM is attached directly to the internal component of the device. And the result is that though you might be able to get yourself a cheap SSD out of it, the RAM won't be removable there. Again, anything before 2024 is actually a lot more common to find sodium RAM inside, because the sodium RAM at that point, it was a lot cheaper and faster for them to just stick in sodium slots and either provide the device with no RAM inside or just sling the RAM in later on at production rather than getting the individual components, soldering on for testing and more. And the same goes, by the way, when it comes to the SSDs in terms of cheapness, because one of the biggest stigmas in early mini PCs and their components was you would get the mini PC, but the SSD or the RAM came from some know-nothing brand that no one had really heard of. And although that's still the case in some mini PCs, I will say I'm seeing a lot, and I mean a lot, more mini PCs rocking out with Crucial memory, rocking out with Samsung memory, rocking out in some cases with Crucial, but less so these days, particularly Samsung memory as well. Samsung memory is one of the most common memories I find inside mini PCs there. So again, double check, and we'll go through some examples in the second half of the video, but there's actually quite a few mini PCs right now on offer that have SODIMM memory inside at 16 and 32 gig, where the pricing of the mini PC is actually very similar to just buying the SSD and the memory on its own. However, as mentioned, mini PCs are not the only way people have been harvesting and shucking SSDs and hard drives and RAM out of devices. The next area, not really one I recommend, but I'd be lying if I said I've not seen people doing it with some positive results, is DVR systems and NVR systems. So these are ex-media boxes, your TiVos and stuff, but also surveillance boxes, because again, going over the last few years, there was a glut of very cheap surveillance systems in the market. NVR systems with one or more drives inside and a bunch of cameras thrown in. These, pricing wise, have not aged well, and if you look at the likes of eBay and more, these surveillance systems are so cheap right now. This is called the Veeam, let's get the box, the V-Zoom. I know, me neither. And this, once you rip this open, and again you can pick this up online now for about 49 nicker, and this has got a 2 TB WD purple drive inside. Now this is the 2 TB model, but there are other configurations out there. There's no RAM that you can remove out of this, and again, the length of time it has been used for, the treatment, how it's been handled is a huge factor. You are still buying second-hand rather than new, but there are plenty of these Chinese, particularly the surveillance companies that have just folded and disappeared into nowhere, where lots of these are being sold new at stupid clearance prices. And again, at 49 nicker, some of them being 2 TB or 4 TB, it's very easy to get some very hard to find drives. Again, I don't highly recommend this realistically, and particularly with the DVR boxes, you generally find quite bad drives inside that aren't really NAS focused, but for single drives and standalone storage, it's not a terrible idea. And finally, the third area of, let's call it, harvesting is servers. Let's be honest, there are a lot of servers. For the longest time, people have purchased used servers in order to build their own true NAS system, build their own unrated system rather than going turnkey. Now, this is obviously more about RAM, because you see a lot of these server systems on eBay and the like, where they've got these SAS 300 gig drives and they're a bit shoddy, but at the same time, there's a lot of RAM knocking around there, and if you don't mind going for slightly slower RAM, and you can accommodate for it, it's actually a nice way to make a decent saving on the RAM. But there is old servers that people have had knocking around, like this is an old Buffalo Terror station here, and this had a 12 TB drive inside. That's a 12 terabyte drive. And these are stupidly cheap second-hand right now. And again, you are talking about drives that have been in use. So, you know, double check, make sure you've got a backup and a RAID in place, which you know is laughable in the current environment. But also, lots of older generation NAS devices that people get rid of because they're no longer being supported by the recent firmware updates and people have upgraded and just want some quick change. A lot of the time, although the drive media you might not want, the memory inside can be very desirable, and some of these astoundingly are actually DDR4. Some of the 2018 to 2020 generation of NAS devices are DDR4 there. Is this a perfect system? No. All of the storage media you see here on the table has come from Shucking in one shape or form, and some of them it's just old memory. Some of it is SSDs, again, that are unbranded. Some of them, it's not really clear what they are because the brands that made them no longer exist. But if you are in a pinch and you need an upgrade, if you are looking for a low priority system upgrade, this can be a desirable option. But let's stop talking about used. Let's talk about new. Let's talk about some of the deals available online right now, either directly for SSDs, RAM and hard drives, or client systems that are potentially ripe for shucking. Let's jump over to the PC. But before we get into the deals and prices online, it is worth getting an idea of our baseline here. 8 gig of memory right now is going to set you back about £100 to £150. And again, that includes the tax. There is a reason I'm focusing on pounds for this video rather than dollars like usual. I'll come back to that later on. But again, if you want a branded memory at 8 gig, that is our gateway. There's a few exceptions to the rule, depending on availability and of course the speed of some of this memory as well. And if you scale up, although just like pre-RAMageddon, if you went from 8 into 16 into 32, etc., there was savings. The savings are actually pretty small these days. In DDR4, they're a little better, but once you look at DDR5, the savings doubling up into the memory isn't actually that substantial within each brand and its branding. Same goes, by the way, when we look at SSDs as well. 1TB, 2TB, 4TB, there's not a lot of room there. And again, there was a time when 1TB of M.2 NVMe memory would set you back around $80. Call that around £99 here, because again, we include the tax on our pricing. Very important, remember, every single pound price that I'm going to show you includes a 20% tax. The rest of the world, you deal with that in your own tax way. But again, that's our baseline for our price. It's about 100 to 129 for a terabyte for Billy Basic storage, and then it goes bananas in the 2 and 4 TBs, and we're not even going to talk about 8 TBs today. And again, we look at hard drives right now, and $799 for a 24 TB drive. To put that into perspective, this drive during Black Friday back in November, I think was $414 or something like that. I'm sure if I'm wrong, I'll put it there on screen. But that's how much things have changed. Now, there are other ways and means. As mentioned, I went through in the video a couple of weeks ago that I was talking about the ways I would say I have used to save money on hard drives and SSDs in the past. And one of the things I actually touched on briefly in that video was a story of a chap on Reddit, or I actually spoke on this one. It was on Data Hoarder's Reddit, and this chap, I actually credited Tom's Hardware, and it's actually CG Tech UK, a chap I actually ended up speaking to on Reddit afterwards about his adventure there. So again, apologies to him on that one for not crediting that correctly. This is a chap that hopped on a plane, went to the US, grabbed some drives and brought them back. And again, there are limits of what you can pay when you go through customs, going back and forth to different countries there, but there's definitely a way to do it. And once you look at the pricing, to fly from, for example, New York to UK, and you're only going to get things delivered to a Dropbox or something like that nearby, then you can actually get some very economical flights. If you're not going to go to central London, there are ways and means to actually do it pretty bloody cheap. And on a side note, for anyone still interested in external drive storage, in hard drives, or looking at potential shucking, you've got things like this offer right now during this Amazon Spring Sale, £134. Again, remember that 20% tax is included. Again, a year ago, I might not have called this a deal, but then at the same time, if you look at the 2024 versions, those prices have already shot up. By the way, again, there is discussion. If you go on Data Hoarder, they do list a lot of different model IDs that you can throw in. This isn't that drive, remember that? But you can throw in model IDs more often than not into Data Hoarder, and discussion around different drives that can be shucked appears on there. Same goes for bare drives as well. We're seeing some price drops, not tremendous. Again, these are offers once you remember about that 20% tax on top, but also factoring in the current cost of 10 TB drives. Some of these then eventually do come across as discounts or just price drops in the current climate. Very, very important there. Some of the externals from WD have seen discounts. This is a 24 TB drive that is slowly approaching the original pricing we saw it last year, and a number of those externals do have price drops on them, but not hugely lucrative. This is the best one's probably the 20 there, but again, not fantastic stuff. The 10 isn't horrific. Same goes 24 TB WD there, 10% off. It's slowly approaching that 24 TB 400 nickel price, but not loads if you're interested in shucking again. But when it comes to storage drives and SSDs, I found this one from Crucial here, so it's $299, and again, 20% tax. I'm going to keep repeating it because I know someone in the comments is going to call that out, and if you do that to wind me up in the comments, it will work. That's 4 terabytes at $299 for a SATA SSD. Again, a year ago, I might not have called that a deal, but now it's actually pretty competitive for SATA SSD storage, particularly because a lot of brands, due to the lack of a lot of NAND floating around, they're not prioritizing 2.5-inch SATA storage. And when it comes to M.2 NVMEs, again, there's a few fake little moody deals floating around, but this one's actually pretty legitimate. Again, in the current climate, and without 20% tax. Gen 4 SSD here, a 4 terabyte drive for that matter. 4 terabytes at $299 currently is actually pretty much a bargain. I'll link to it below for you to check that out. And for those that don't need that kind of storage, but you're going to go for multiple smaller drives, you're interested in the bulk speed rather than the overall capacity. You've got things like this KLEVV. They're a brand I've seen multiple times at Computex. It's got a decent little range of drives there, and this is a 500 gig SSD down to £76. Again, remember the tax, the current climate, blah, blah, blah. And now returning to that subject of shucking mini PCs, I've shortlisted a few decent little offers for mini PCs here that are of the previous generation, but crucially have got a decent amount of storage and memory to play with. And I've gone through and found reviews from other sites that have shown inside, at least at the time of those reviews being published, that they were using removable components. They weren't using pre-attached. Now that might have changed, but bear in mind that the reason I've listed on Amazon is you've got that return policy and you can open up a mini PC without invalidating its warranty because of upgrades. They can't really screw you over for that one. So for example, this Boss game, $499 for a mini PC is actually quite expensive, but it's got a 32 gig DDR5 storage module and 1 TB of SSD inside there. That is going to make up the bulk of that price in the current environment. And yes, it isn't a huge saving, but keep in mind big part of this video is that in some cases, you genuinely cannot even find the storage in the first place there. And again, I found here on Notebook Checker, this machine getting taken apart. And as we can see here, there's that crucial module there inside. Again, I will link to all of this stuff below, so things may have changed, but so keep in mind with your return policies there. Another example is one from Boss Game here. This is $439 again. It's in pounds, for think of your tax, etc. But this is still a 32 gig module inside there, just half a terabyte of storage, but still nonetheless $439. And again, I found a video here online. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce that there. But again, a couple of SODIMM slots inside there, although again, this is where we're getting into that. We don't really know who the brands are producing this RAM and memory, but beggars can't really be choosers currently in some locations. Next up, Ace Magician, a company with, people have got vibes of malware a little while ago when they had some issues at factory level. But if you're going to be ripping out components anyway, that's up to you. But again, £390 there, 20% tax, etc. And this is a device with another 32 gig DDR4 module there, depending on your own setup there and the device you're running, and half a terabyte SSD inside there at $399. We've already talked about what 32 gig modules are costing there. And again, we found here, this is michaelstinkerings.org. And again, he did a breakdown, take apart of this device, and there's the memory inside there for us to look at. And finally, we've got a couple of devices from this brand here, Nipogi, and this is the P2. This device here with 16 gig of memory and 256 gigabyte SSD inside is just $229. Again, an easy little upgrade pull out for a DDR4 module. And here we are at PC Varge. They've already opened it up there. Luckily though, I don't just have to show it to you there because I've got a unit here on the shelf. This is the E2, a different product from that range. And again, similar to one that we're going to be showing you in a moment. Unlock it there at the top and boom, there is that module there inside and that storage drive. So 16 gig DDR4, just straight out the gate to be used. Next up at $489, 32 gig of RAM and a 1 TB SSD inside this. Again, whether you want to keep these devices and plug them on a shelf for later on, that's really up to you. This is about harvesting those components. And again, now we go over to Heist.d. As you can see, there is the component layout inside there. What about buying a retail NAS device and ripping the RAM out? Is there any savings to be made there? We already talked about second-hand NAS solutions and ways in which we can save a bit of bunts there. I would argue there isn't a huge amount of saving to be made here. There is ways and means, and this is one of the reasons we are sticking with pounds rather than dollars on this, because right now you've got the likes of TerraMaster and Ugreen and a few other different vendors engaging with this springtime promo on Amazon and indeed on their own website. And in these cases, they are rocking out quite substantial discounts on some of their devices, like this one that's got an 8 gig 5200 megahertz SODIMM DDR5 module inside. Now, that RAM module retails for about $150 to $180. So 271, you're getting the whole NAS, and you can just take that RAM out and stick this thing on a shelf, or swap out the lower capacity RAM that you have, or the lower performing RAM that you have, and just swap the two SODIMMs out for an upgrade on another system there. So again, at 271, there's ways and means. And again, 271 tax, blah, blah, blah. And the reason I've gone for pounds, as mentioned, is because these promos don't seem to be in the US right now for the most part. There are exceptions, and we'll get onto their own retail websites, because both TerraMaster and Ugreen are actually running promos on their own site alongside the Amazon promotion. So for example, with TerraMaster, a lot of the pricing there, even when you do go via the UK doorway, it shows the US pricing as well. And some of these devices have got like 16 gig of DDR5 SODIMM inside, such as that F8 SSD Plus. Now, for the US, that price has gone up quite substantially. But if you look at the device in the UK, some of the pricing is actually a little bit more affordable, and that goes for going on Amazon itself. So, for example, if we go into TerraMaster here, and we have a look at the TerraMaster devices, there are some discounts to be made on some of the older generation NAS devices in their portfolio. The 424 and the 423 and the stuff that came before it. All of those have got either DDR5 or DDR4 memory that you can rip out. And that's not even withstanding if we were talking about utilizing buying used products as well. There are ways and means to make savings buying these pre-built solutions, but rather than buying them so you could just immediately take out the RAM and bin them, like we've talked about before, again, do it responsibly or sell the NAS second-hand with no SSD or RAM storage inside. But this does allow you to swap out the RAM from something else you have and actually save a bit of bunts and make 1.5 to 2 upgrades in the process. Add to that some of these discounts on their own home websites, again, TerraMaster and Ugreen pretty much exclusively for this, a lot of the time you can sign up to their newsletters and then get a further discount on these solutions. Again, it just only goes an extra step towards that whole 1.5 upgrade system rather than buying a mini PC and gutting it out and then reselling what's left to make some of that money back. There are savings to be made. The bottom line is SSD, hard drive and RAM pricing isn't going to come down anytime soon. I reckon the rest of this year and probably a good part of next year, this is going to be a persistent problem that's only going to get worse. So, you know, little ways in which you can make a saving, little ways that you can cut corners are always going to be useful. I still don't think most of the things I've talked about in this video I would ever recommend to larger business, even mid-tier business or mission critical in any way. But for home users that are looking to make approximate upgrades or like-for-like upgrades across 2 systems, there are economies to be made. And if you're going to be looking at upgrading a specific component for your PC, your laptop, your NAS, your whatever, do look into some of the options that I've talked about right now, where you can buy a device, rip out some of the better components inside and maybe put the rest of it to another purpose and take out the existing older component you've got knocking around for that like-for-like trade-off. But thank you so much for watching. I'll link to a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, along with links below to a lot of the devices and the components that are on offer right now. If you want to help out the channel, please use those links. We get a commission in any of those. But apart from that, I'll be making a different video on this subject very, very soon, revolving around Chinese memory as we make our way to China for some videos in the next few weeks. So I recommend you check those out. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.